Good morning, almost afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Black Independence Day, the launch event for Black Independence Project. My name is Lorianne Stacy, and I'll be moderating today's panel, Teaching Through Trauma. I'm very excited about this panel because I am an educator. I'm also a facilitator. I've been working in New York City for the past few years, currently as a community school director. So I work a lot in school culture strategy in collaboration with school leadership as well as community partners. And I'm a huge believer in crafting spaces for self-reflection as well as community building. And I believe that this event is one that brings that all together. So just to give you guys some context on today's panel, Teaching Through Trauma, the idea behind it is just that trauma affects students' abilities to learn, their ability to focus, manage their emotions, both in the classroom and outside of that. And so as Black students, Brown students are experiencing the effects of their own personal trauma, may it be from their upbringing, they're also experiencing the effects of COVID-19, which in and of itself is another trauma. They're also experiencing the resurgence of the civil rights movement through Black Lives Matter. And so with all of this happening, trauma-informed teaching is a necessary step and really an important support in education to make sure that students have a better understanding of their world and how they're operating within it so that they can not only be successful academically, but socially as well. So today we have the largest panel so far for Black Independence Day. I have 5 educators joining us, and so I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of who they are, and then we'll get into the panel. So we have joining us Leslie Butterfly Soul Taylor, an entertainer, performance, personal development trainer and coach who focuses on social and emotional growth. We have Antonia George, who's an educator and writer from the Bronx, New York. She's gearing up for her 3rd year in education in the classroom, and it's her 6th year overall. We have Justin McClennan, who has served as an educator for over 15 years and is also the co-founder of mind.code.create. It's an education platform building emotional intelligence and community empowerment. We have Kim Clincy, a current principal and founder of Education for All Consulting, as well as Tariq Lang, a teacher and executive director and CEO of Educators for Justice, a nonprofit organization founded by educators, really hoping to march towards a brighter future and justice for the next generation. So for this panel, I'll be fielding questions to our panelists. You as attendees will also have an opportunity to ask questions. I'm gonna encourage you to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. And around 12:30 mark, we will have an opportunity to get into the Q&A. And you can also use the chat feature if you just wanna follow along, send messages to our panelists, but all questions will be saved for the end. So with that, I'm gonna start off with Leslie and give all the panelists a chance to tell us a little bit more about themselves, how they got started in the work of education and what they currently do now.
All right, so I started work with an organization called Momentum Education as a consultant and a trainer. And so that work is, many of our workshops are centered around social and emotional growth. And so as a trainer, it really was our hope to get people to really to get out of their own way and really address any hidden beliefs. What we began to do is do more professional development work for educators. And we did trainings for teams, right? And so what began to happen, we began to notice that our educators didn't have safe spaces to really be honest and authentic because they're, for fear of retribution, things like that. So what we began to do is do more trainings intentionally around creating safe spaces for educators. When I'm not doing that kind of work, I'm an academic case manager for La Casa Norte. It's a homeless youth program here in Chicago. And what we do, we provide housing and different wraparound social service supports for our young people who were formerly homeless. They hold a CHA voucher where they can live in the city anywhere for low income, as long as they're in school getting their secondary education completed. So, and when I'm not doing that, I'm performing. I use my platform to tell my truth because I can't afford therapy.
I love that, Leslie. Thank you for sharing with everyone, especially this idea of supporting our educators. I know we're here for the students and our panel is going to focus on student voice, but I think it's also important that we are thinking about how do we take care of ourselves as educators so we can continue to do this work. So we're going to jump on into the next person, Antonia. You share with us.
Hey, hi. Sorry, I'm Antonia. I'm, like Lorianne said, starting my third year in the classroom. I got started in this work, I think, because similar to what we're about to talk about in this panel, I had teachers who were really impactful in my life. And as I started reflecting when I got to college and, you know, studying child development, all of those things, I thought about the impact that they had on me. So I wanted to be someone who could help students who were dealing with some of the things that I was dealing with when I was a child. And so that started my work in college of doing different projects, working in preschool and all of this, and I just loved it. So from there, I've been working in elementary education and having the best time of my life. So.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Justin McClennan. Like LA said, this is I'm entering my 15th year as an educator. I'm based out of New York City. I started my career down in Bogota, Colombia, working at an international school for 4 years. The last 10 years, I've been in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. My first 3 in Brooklyn were working as a kindergarten teacher. And the last 7 has been as a PE teacher. And I really got started in education because of just the way in which specials and extracurricular programming had a huge impact on me as a kid. I was an athlete, I was a musician, and I felt like the way our approach to academics just didn't bring into account the deeply impactful ways that those things can help all of our kids just become who they are and find their passions. And that's really led me on a journey these last 15 years to just find the things that can work for our kids, to push them to be the best they can be, and to find their passion. So the latest endeavor I've been doing is an organization called mind.code.create, which is meant to focus in on brain science and computer science as a way to kind of help kids understand who they are, what the way their brain thinks, and also focused on trauma responsive teaching.
Hi, my name is Kim. I currently am a principal in Harlem, but I started teaching in Baltimore. I got into teaching when at Howard. I took a class on race and racism, and one of the segments of the class focuses on the education and the achievement gap, and that kind of fascinated me with this idea of how racism created this whole system where kids are struggling to achieve. That's kind of what pulled me in, and as you can hear from Justin, year 15, it's a very addictive career, so I've really enjoyed it. I recently moved to New York, where I have the pleasure of working at Progressive Charter School, which is very anti the no-nonsense charter model. So we do a lot of work with instructional moves and classroom management moves that are sensitive to students who are showing signs of trauma, and kind of like all of our students. So I'm excited to be here to talk about how we can better support them during this time.
Hey everyone, my name is Tyreek Lang. I am an educator. I work at a charter school in Brooklyn, New York. This is going to be my 3rd year. And while I'm there, I'm going to be an 8th grade educator, but I'm also going to be the 8th grade grade team leader. So in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to be leading and working and partnering with other teachers in the building to make sure that we influence the culture of the building. But however, outside of school, myself and 4 other co-workers from my charter school, we started an organization called Educators for Justice. And our goal and our mission is to really create safe spaces, enjoyable spaces, positive spaces, life-giving spaces, to enlighten and empower not just our kids, not just our educators, not just administrators, but also parents. So a holistic approach to education. And so our goal is really to foster these environments, because education has the potential to, well, education doesn't have the potential. Education is the catalyst to change within our culture and our society. But the system of education has the potential to grow tremendously. And the industry, in a sense, has the ability to adapt and to grow, because it's full of critical thinkers and innovative, creative people who are innovative thinkers and process differently, right? And so we create an environment where we're teaching our kids how to think rather than what to think. I think we're really going to elevate the level of education that we give in our communities, especially communities of color. So growing up, I was a student who went to public school in Brooklyn. However, I also went to charter school at one point in my career. And so I was able to experience the both and see the differences. And at the end of the day, we can say that there are major differences between charter and public. However, the system of education is flawed. It's a lot of injustices that we see that's in it with the prison, from school to prison pipeline. And no matter what program what's charter, if you went to charter or public, those things are persistent, right? So Educators for Justice, we're passionate about bringing awareness to those injustices and calling them out and rallying educators all around, all over the world, all backgrounds, all races, all intersects and identity markers to call for change. And so that's why I'm here today, to be partnered with these great educators to have this discussion.
Thank you, Tyreek. So with that, a lot of what I heard, especially from you, Tyreek, is that education is a catalyst for change, right? And what you said, Kim, it is a very addicting career, right? Like, you want to continue to help shape these young minds. And I think something that really stood out from what you said was this idea of supporting the greatness within students. And so with that, our first question today is, what are some ways that teachers, educators as a whole, can center student voice and relationships with families when making decisions about their education and their classroom practices? And we can start right back at the top with you, Leslie.
I think one thing that happens often, we have town halls, but parents aren't often invited to them. And I think if we start with a town hall for parents, right? I think there's an opportunity to acknowledge where they've been in this educational process, and then give space to them so that they can actually have access to questions, so that when they're with that student at home, they then can better understand how to support their student, as opposed to just supporting their child. I think what happens, they know Junior or they know their daughter, but they don't experience that child inside of education until we had this distance learning situation, is what I'll call it. And so in that, some parents might want to send apology notes like, oh wait, my little angel may be a little different. But I think we need to give space and voice for parents, actually, and then do it back that way, from the home to school, as opposed to school to home. Many of our educators are bonus moms and dads, and they're left with the responsibility of not only educating, but rearing in some situations. And I think we need to support our parents with accessing that power in such a way where they can move forward. Because we don't know, we have students at home, but we don't know how we're impacting or re-traumatizing the student in the parent who feels inept.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. I think one of the important parts for me has been building relationships with students and families, and making sure that parents aren't only getting a call from me when something went down, that there's this back and forth, there's this conversation, so that we then can meet students and families where they are and provide the help that they want. Like, do you actually want these flashcards, or do you want this other thing that has nothing to do with education but is going to help you be able to better support your student? Do you not want anything from me? And I think that building that relationship is important, because we're able to see families as humans and they are then able to see us as humans. Sometimes it turns into getting calls at 11:30 and I'm like, hold on. But it's important for me to allow families that space to be able to see each other as humans. And I think that when we do that in the classroom for students as well, where they feel ownership of the environment, where they feel that this is a community, they are then able to feel safe, or the goal is for them to feel safe. We can't dictate or determine what makes students feel safe, but creating that community and that environment has, for me, been one of the biggest ways to allow students and parents that freedom to be who they are.
And really, to build on this idea of safety, I think it's so important when we talk about being trauma sensitive. The ways to build a safe community are, there's so many different kind of ideas that are thrown around, but I want to focus in on one, which is circles. And I feel as though when we talk about dialogue and we talk about building relationships, the way that dialogue is structured and the way that relationship is structured, it has to be a democratic, everybody at the table, everybody with an equal voice, for people to feel safe. And I think that's not something that we're used to in our society. Our society is built on this idea of a triangle where you have somebody at the top making decisions and they have to kind of, go down the chain of command. But the idea of a circle just flips that completely, and it puts people with an equal voice. And I think we did not grow up in a place where circles were happening. We don't know, we're coming into our voices as adults and learning kind of in our own ways. But imagine if school was the place where that more democratic and egalitarian mindset began. And I think about this idea of being the change. It's like, how do we expect our kids to grow up to create a world that has equity if the school systems that they're growing up in have the teacher at the center? And when I went to school for education, there was this big push to have student-centered learning, and it makes a lot of sense. It's like you have teacher-centered, and on the other side of it you have student-centered, but it misses this idea of the collective. It's like, what about group-centered? What about us all being in one group and talking about the things that we're feeling, talking about our passions, talking about ways that we can help one another, and school as the place for that work to happen. I don't see any other place where we can really do this in our society, to be honest. These structures are so ingrained into our society that I feel like children are the only people that haven't been so deeply ingrained by the idea of these oppressive structures that we can allow them to, learn equity by living equity. And if you just think of the structure of a classroom, the physical structure of a classroom, if you walk into a class and the desks are in rows and they're facing a teacher, that's not going to work. It can't happen like that anymore. We have to find places, and whether it's amongst the kids or amongst the leadership with the parents or amongst parents, this is like a fundamental shift that I think we need to have in order to talk about equity at all. And people that need to feel safe, people that have trauma in their past, people who are nervous, those feelings begin to change as your brain begins to bond with the people around them. And so even though we can't say what necessarily makes each person feel safe, we do know that creating a safe community where people can be free to use their voice is going to use our brain chemistry to build these bonds and to help us feel safe. So I don't see necessarily the idea of equity and trauma responsiveness as different things. I really see that they're all connected.
Thank you for that, Justin. And before we get into Kim and Tyreek's responses, I just wanted to highlight some things that I thought were amazing that came up so far. Leslie, you really spoke about helping parents and families to hone their power, which I don't think we often have a chance to speak about, right? Like, what does it look like for our families, for our students to reclaim their power in these structures that are constantly dictating how they should behave how they should respond. And Antonia, you talked a lot about, right, like meeting our families where they're at. What are their actual wants? First of all, do they even want us to be involved, right? Like we don't even ask those questions sometimes when we meet them. It's just like, you need this, and here's an option, and here's that. And I think it's really important that we're asking these questions along the way. And then Justin, obviously community circles. I began running community circles specifically about a year ago with my own organization, but then outside of that, like to my own community, and I agree completely. And it's so interesting when you present people with this idea of let's build this thing together, that sometimes there's a nervousness to that too, right? Something I'm sure a lot of us are used to is just having norms, right? Norms when we're speaking, and norms when we're interacting in the classroom, and what are these set of rules? And I start off every circle saying, what do you need from this space today? What norm do you want the group to hold that will help you to function well? And I've had several times where people are like, I don't know what I need. And I think it's because we're not used to asking each other those questions, and we're not used to hearing people ask, what do I need from this? And then I tried it at work, an environment where we've had circles before, and there was almost a breakdown in leadership, like, well, what if someone doesn't like suggest a rule or a norm that like we need, and then like somebody else won't pay attention to it, and then they won't be able to function. And I think a lot of what you guys have highlighted is that people are gonna operate best when they have a chance to have ownership over something, when they have a chance for their powers. I really wanted to hold up some of those things before Kim and Tyreek gave their answers, continuing to think about, right, student voice, how do we center that, building these relationships.
Thanks, Lorianne and Justin. That's actually a really nice segue into what I was thinking as you were talking. The first thing I was thinking about is, anyone who knows me, Tyreek might laugh, is like I'm really invested in Zaretta Hammond's work right now. And she really does a lot of studying of the brain and the way it processes information. And one thing she's really reiterated is that this idea of creating a safe space isn't a must do, but it's like a may do. As in if kids don't feel safe in their learning environment, they're not gonna learn. They're not gonna get that deeper level of information processing, and they're not gonna learn how to retrieve information from their long-term memory because the trauma blocks them. So the first thing I think about with like, how do we give students a voice, is like, you need to plan for it. Like the same way we intellectually prepare for every other component of the day, you have to be intellectually prepared to make sure you're creating a space, like you said, Antonia, with the children. And that also begins with checking yourself, because it's like you said, Lorianne, in these restorative circles, what if they don't say the right thing? It's kind of like replacing your ego with questions and trusting that the kids are gonna bring things to the community already. So some things we do at our school, Justin and Lorianne, is we do opening circle every day with our students. So we have opening circle, we have closing circle, and then we have the bigger community circle. But one thing you see with teachers is they don't realize you need to plan for opening circle if you want the outcomes to be students feeling safe enough to speak. And we found even with COVID, some teachers are like, oh, we're doing opening circle in virtual learning. It's like, we're doing it longer in virtual learning because there's so much more they're gonna wanna unpack. The other thing people talk about is this balance of empathy and high expectations. When we're creating these virtual communities, I actually just did a PD for Teach for America Baltimore, where we modeled for them how you co-create the community routines with the students. Because you can communicate a subtle act of exclusion to your class the second they come in and you've already decided what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So we say with the students, like, there's two roles in a conversation, a speaker and a listener. What's the role of the speaker? And they give us their ideas and we chart them. Then what's the role of the listener, and we chart them. So when we're in the classroom, all of the charts on the wall have been created as a community. All of our rules, all of our routines, and that invests students and it gives them a voice. Kind of like the beginning of equity is like letting them speak, trusting that they're gonna bring something, and we do the same thing with the parents. So Leslie, I saw you mention like town halls and how sometimes parents don't get invited to them. We have town halls just for the parents, right? That's part of this virtual world has made things so much easier. So we have our teachers will do little town hall huddles. We'll do them as a school. We'll do coffee and conversations, but like being very intentional and not just taking it from like conversation to concrete. How are you making a plan so that everyone feels safe and supported during this time? And then the other thing we do is we always end opening and closing circles with mindfulness, because that's kind of giving them some more tools of how they can deal during this time where it's hard to emotionally self-manage.
I get the benefit of going last because everyone has so many great ideas. And I'm just like, yeah, what Antonia said, what Kim said, what Leslie said, what Justin said. But in reality, everything that everyone has said is is correct, right? And it is powerful because one of the key things to understanding this is understanding the power of voice, right? Understanding the power of my voice, understanding the power of our kids' voices, understanding the power of those who are leadership voices, understand parents' voices. And, you know, I grew up, I'm not sure how everyone else could connect to this, but I grew up being told by adults in my life, children are to be seen and not heard. And that played a part into how I even developed growing up to a point where it was just recently, maybe within a couple months, maybe about a month ago, that I had a really, really hard conversation with my father that was needed to be said. And once, I can't believe it, but once I broke through that barrier of telling my own dad everything that was on my heart about just life or how I felt towards our relationship, that broke the barrier where now I no longer am worried about how someone else perceives what I'm going to say that's in leadership. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not interested in what they perceive. Only thing I'm responsible for is sharing my truth in love and sharing my truth in respect and in a professional way. And so if, as an educator, if I'm still processing through this and breaking through these norms that were kind of taught to me as a kid because of my culture, that I'm to be seen and not heard, and I'm an educator and I'm supposed to be fighting for justice, how much, what justice can we really fight for if we don't own our voices? And I think if we don't keep a generation of our kids now growing up in the same, under the same model that we grew up under, and we empower them to use their voice at a young age and not penalize them for it, because I can tell you this, there have been so many times that I've seen a kid so frustrated because he felt like a consequence to his actions were unjust. He would say, I did it, but I don't think I should be in trouble this bad, right? And that goes unheard and overlooked and whatever. And then the parents, unless a parent comes up there and raises all kinds of hell, things don't really get changed, right? Or, oh, let's just, forget it. That parent gonna get mad, so we can't do that. And that's not really the case, right? You see that throughout education. And so I think empowering our kids to use their voice, and because education could be a place where, or their schools could be a place where kids could look back and remember, this is where I was empowered to walk in my power. This is where I was challenged to walk in my truth. Or they can look back and go, this is where they tried to silence me. This is where they tried to penalize me for being honest. Because the verbiage says, or the quote is, people don't remember what you did, but they remember how you made them feel. And if kids are leaving our building in a way of, I hate that place, they get on my nerves, I don't want to be there no more. No wonder people don't want to come back and serve their community 20 years later. They don't want nothing to do with that place because they remember the feelings were negative. And so empowering kids and supporting them to be honest, to be truthful, to be powerful, and walk in that, and not be afraid of getting it wrong, not be afraid of making a mistake, really is going to change everything about it. But I definitely believe that it starts with the emotional health of the educator. If you're not emotionally healthy as an educator, there's no way you can help reproduce other emotionally healthy individuals. You don't reproduce who you want to be. You reproduce who you are. So if you are emotionally healthy, you're going to reproduce emotionally healthy kids and develop them. If you're emotionally unhealthy, you're not going to produce other emotionally healthy beings. That's just how it goes. Especially if you have the impact to influence their life from 7:15 in the morning to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. You're with them all day. So they pick up traits from you. Are they picking up good traits? Or are they picking up unhealthy traits? So we have to really think about how are we showing up in our classrooms? How are we showing up in our meetings? How are we showing up to the building in the morning? The kids see us outside. Do we say hi? Or we go, ugh, I'm over this place? Because they pick that up and they see it. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Tariq. I think it's so important what you said, right? We can do so much from where we are, but the better that we take care of ourselves, the more we feel taken care of by our own communities, by our own leadership, is better we're going to take care of students. And so this next question, because I think we might be able to squeeze in one more, I'm going to try, really asks about what are common misconceptions about the best ways to educate Black and Brown children, especially dealing with trauma. I do want to tie that in to an attendee question from Olivia, who states, what are some examples of norms students might ask? But really tying it into the context, for example, something that I said was that students may not know what to ask for. Those participants might not know what to ask for and could be benefit from examples. And so I know I'm not a panelist, but just like my thoughts on that are very much like everything is about how you phrase things, right? You might not be able to phrase things to a student like, hey, what rules do you want to pay attention to today? I don't want to pay attention to any rules, but you might say like, what might make you show up best in this classroom? And I think framing it so that it comes from a point where they understand what the question is really going to be important. So I think about that with this question about misconceptions. I think sometimes we think there's a right way to go about reaching a destination or reaching an answer. And one, we know that there's multiple ways, but what are misconceptions and how do you think that educators can work to address them is the question. So we'll start with you, Leslie.
Well, I think Tyreek surmised really the answer to that question. Just thinking about the emotional health of the educator and who they're bringing to the day. I think one of the questions that we might want to start with our students is, who are you bringing to the day? And really, because then you start there with their own makeup and then they get to speak into themselves. I think the mistake that we've been teaching people for years is that you shouldn't talk to yourself because it's crazy. I think it's crazy if you don't. I believe that people should talk themselves into themselves. I think if our young people start their day with who am I bringing to the day, then they get to acknowledge how smart they are. They get to, acknowledge, hey, this is where I need help, right? This is where I could use support. Or I don't know how to ask for support. Like all of that languaging is a part of it. I think what happens is that we cookie cut sometimes the approach to learning. So, you're sitting in the back of the class, so you're not learning. But that person may actually enjoy being in the back of the class because that way they can, in their minds, they're managing the room. We never considered to really ask, right? Why are you in the back of the class? And then using I don't know as an opportunity to know, right? Well, I don't know. That's the universal language. In any language, ask any student or any team, what'd you do today? I don't know. What they teach today? I don't know. And instead of using that as a negative, go, great. What would you like to know? And then, we have, the other thing too, is how we approach our young people with IEPs, right? Have you ever talked to somebody who is super, super amazing over cocktails, but when you start to talk about work, their voice change? They start talking as if they're in their particular field of study. Sometimes you talk to our students as if we're therapists. Okay, so we're going to go over this again, and then that educator is left with the responsibility of delivering that module of curriculum 3 and 4 times differently. But if that educator is exhausted, then the students can actually notice the pivot in that educator, and they go, "Ooh, you must be the slow student. You're the special student." Do you get what I'm saying? And so it's in how we deliver the messaging and then stepping back and doing our own emotional check-in, wait a minute. This ain't got nothing to do with you. This actually happened at home, but I'm bringing it to the classroom. And now I'm picking apart all of our stereotypes. I can go into that around Caribbean culture and foreign educators, but I'll leave it alone here inside of pedagogy and what it is to raise teach a student from your culture without bringing culture into the classroom. But I'll leave it alone.
So I have a similar idea about, there's this idea that there's one size fits all. So I'm trauma responsive. I've been trained in social emotional, so I know how to do this, and I'm gonna do this, and this, and it's all gonna work. And I think that is one of the biggest flaws, that we could just paste the Band-Aid on it and everything will be fine. I think that every student needs something different, kind of like what you said, Leslie. Every student needs something different. And the way that trauma presents itself in their bodies is different. And how they react and how they and who they are is shaped by their lived experiences, is shaped by all of these different things. And so to think that we can just have one way to fix students is the problem. I think that similar to what you said, I don't necessarily ask who are you bringing, but I ask what do you need, and I also ask how are you feeling today. I used to have like a mood meter in my classroom, and there would be this was when I did second grade. There would be a huge smiley face at the top and a frowny face at the bottom, and they would like put a post-it note, an anonymous post-it note, wherever they felt that they were when they walked through the door. And so like the one who threw it on the floor underneath the mood meter, I knew that I had to check in with her because she wasn't even on the scale. And so finding ways to back to building relationships. If you have relationships with students, you know, oh, there's something going on there. Like you can read it in their face, you can see it in their demeanor. And sometimes you don't know, and that's why the relationship that you build has to be strong and has to have some strength to it.
So I think a common misconception is kind of addressing individual behaviors and not looking at kind of the more general culture that exists in the classroom. I think that so much of our like individualistic mindset is you look at behaviors and you say, okay, why did that student do that? And that's a valid question. And I think that question it takes a lot of understanding of that student to answer it, but it also takes a lot of understanding of just the space that you've created as a teacher. And I think that like just to give an example of a common misconception about, you know, when students are being hyperactive in a classroom, I've heard this idea that they don't have any time to run around, or they don't get enough recess, they sit still too much, and that's why that's happening. And I'm a PE teacher. And so one of my big things is always, once we're in the gym, we got to work out, we got to get our energy out, because once we go back to the classroom, we're not going to be able to do that. And we need to get that energy out in a certain way, right? So one week I decided to do PE one day and just sharing circles the next day. And I had PE with the same class 4 days that week. So 2 days of PE, 2 days of circles. And at the end of the week, I asked the 3 classroom teachers how their week went. And I kid you not, on the 2 days that I had sharing circles, the whole class, they were calm, they were kind, they were learning. And on the 2 days that I had PE, which was this rigorous physical activity, they were hyperactive in the classroom, you know? And so like this whole idea of, you know, they're hyperactive, or like we have these certain kids that need to get their energy out, you know, I think that is true. There's definitely validity to approaching kids based on their individual needs, but you can't miss the group approach. And just coming back to the culture responsive teaching and the brain, and what Hammond has done in that book is, you know, after being in this field for the last 14 years, what she has done is revolutionary, the way that she's brought the brain science together and put it down on the level of what the classroom looks like. So if anybody on this call has not read that book, you have to get into it. And it gets a lot more into this idea about culture and how culture really is the decider of behavior and how we feel and whether or not we feel safe in a classroom.
Thank you, Justin. I feel the same. As an educator, that book completely changed my whole perspective. It was like literally one of the most prolific things I've read as an educator. I want to touch on a little bit of what everybody said, but I find like the biggest misconception is just what trauma looks like. I think we are quick to label it when we see defiance or students like acting out in really egregious manners, but I think we miss it a lot when it's coming through goofiness or shyness or apathetic or disinterest. So we find we have to do a lot of work with teachers in recognizing trauma actually presents itself very differently, and that person that's disengaged in your classroom, that's a warning sign too, just like the kid who might have flipped the desk that day. So a lot of times it's like, do you know what trauma looks like? And then, we can talk about defiance all day, because usually the way teachers respond to defiance is trauma inducing within itself, because they don't understand that that is usually a manifestation of some type of trauma itself. The second thing I find with a common misconception is to start with the children, and instead of what you were saying, Leslie and Tyreek, start with the adults. A lot of times you realize as a coach and as a leader, teachers are the trigger. There's a lot of microaggressions going from teacher to student. There's a lot of subtle acts of exclusion. There's a lot of use of language and a misunderstanding of culture, and the way these different cultures in your classroom are interpreting your facial expressions, your body language, the manner in which you're speaking to me, and then even you as an adult unpacking your biases about what you think is the appropriate way to react, what you think is the appropriate response to certain things. And then the next misconception is, once we see a child in trauma, lowering the academic expectation, which has the most significant and scary long-term effects. So it's not about dropping the bar and going into savior complex and like, oh my God, but this thing is going on at home. It's about what you said, Justin, creating a safer space with restorative circles, teaching them some emotional self-management, not in the absence of helping them understand they do live in a racist and oppressive society, which is the problem with a lot of social emotional learning curriculums. They're not anti-racist. So no, they don't need to be empathetic towards the racists. Like, that's not what we're gonna teach them. But like letting them know like your life does carry an additional amount of stress, and then teaching them tools to process it. And I don't know if you can ever understand it, but cope with it and know that it's a reality. So those are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see. And then giving teachers non-threatening strategies, like a really small strategy for defiance is offering kids choice. So you don't get into these power struggles of, I said it, so do it. Oh, you don't want to do this thing I said? How about these other options? Like, there's a lot of really small things, and I feel like teachers don't get real professional learning on how to respond to trauma or how to identify it.
I just want to, yes, 100%. And Kim, you once again took a lot of my points. But no, I think that is so true. I think dealing and actually touching on the aspect of the teacher as a human, right? And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that it starts with the kids, and the kids are acting out and this. And I remember my first year, I would go to my DCI, my Dean of Curriculum and Instruction. Her name was Tara England, a powerhouse. I mean, she's just, comes to ELA, she just knew it. But she also understood the power of relationship. And being in the field of education for 13 years, she understood she said that she will always go into her school years knowing, all right, these 4 kids, I have to build a relationship with them, in a sense, because they're the influencers in the class. Like, they know how, so she really honed in on that. But I would go to her my first couple of months and I'd be like, they weren't listening, and they weren't, and she's like, okay, let me see your lesson plan. And I'd be like, here, and she's looking at me, she's like, well, it doesn't really know, do you know what you're teaching today? And I'm like, she's like, kids want to learn, but they also know that when you don't know your stuff, you're not worthy of being learned from. So why would they sit and listen to you? I was like, wow, okay. I'm going to internalize all of this. I mean, everything, every standard and object. I mean, I'm going to know it, and they're going to walk away. And I think looking at myself and how I was showing up in class. And did you read the IEP report? Did you read the fact that it says, don't engage in certain conversations, go that, because that's going to trigger X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, oh, and did I read it? No. However, I also will point out that there was a lack in training that we do receive, right? It's kind of rushed over. Like, make sure you read the IEPs. Great. Have a great first day. Make sure you do this behavior system, do these techniques, and the kids will be great. And then you're doing it, and you're like, this ain't happening, because we forget that we're not teaching robots, we're teaching humans. And so even in the way we talk to the kids, even in the way we try to encourage or motivate them, right? Like, based on data. Oh, you were number 5 last week. Let's see if you can get to number 3 this week. If we wanted to be in competition with that school, this is what my kids told me my first year. If we wanted to be in competition with that other school, our parents would have sent us there, but we here. So why are you telling us we rank 8? Like, we don't care. And I'm like, okay. And after that, those conversations with them, I started like, wow, I got to change the way I'm thinking about how I'm showing up in this classroom. So it really started with me instead of me focusing on the kids so much in terms of how they're showing up. I need to work on how am I showing up? And kids would look at, one day I walked into school in the classroom and I was having a really bad day. And one of my kids said, Mr. Lang, you having a rough day, huh? And I was like, I just walked in, and they can feel it and they can see it. They're like, because you show up differently when you're happy. And some days when the last class got you upset, you mad now. And I'm like, you know what? But I needed to be aware of that information because I needed to know how I was showing up. So yeah.
Thank you. And I think that is absolutely super duper important, right? Our students are human. They're going to react to the way that we show up. If I show up engaged and ready and focused on my students, they're going to show up for me. And if I am in a mood, like they're probably going to be in a mood too. So thank you for ending with that. So we are getting to the end of our panel. I did say we would end by 12:40, possibly 12:45. And I'm going to ask our panelists to stay with us for a little bit longer because we do have a question that I think would be super duper helpful being addressed in this context. Obviously, a lot of schools are still figuring out their plans for the fall, going into remote learning and all of that. So one of our panelists, Tiana, asked, how are you planning to transfer your trauma-informed SEL or family-focused initiatives to a remote setting? Some of you may have already had experience doing that. So I'm gonna give everyone, I'm gonna ask to keep your answers short to about a minute, maybe two, but how you plan on doing that given the context. And I will say, since this is a panel question, anyone can start.
I'll just say real quick, what I do, I host a team check-in every Sunday. And so we took a break over the summer, so when school started back, we'll do it, and it's a global check-in. So we had children from Israel, we had teens from all over, especially when the pandemic was at its height, as well as the uprising. And so, and it was, for those students, they were able to go, oh, this distance learning, ta-da, that's what this is. But what they were focused on, what I found is that some of them were so distracted with what was going on outside of their window. And so they needed a place to discuss it, have that conversation, and then get back to classroom work, right? So it's really allowing them the freedom to go, I don't like this. This is what I'm concerned about. I'm worried when my dad leaves the house, I don't know if he's coming back home. So, you know, we do that. So that's something that I actually do.
So I kind of started the process of transferring over all of this when everything first happened. And we did virtual from March until June. But one thing that I did was, well, since I teach third grade, one thing that I noticed was that my students were at an age where they weren't able to really communicate with friends. Like older students are like, you know, talking to their friends, whatever. Some of my kids have TikTok to do to whatever. But at their age, their communication with friends is usually facilitated by parents. And so without devices and whatever, when they were on Zoom with us, that was the only time that they would be able to communicate with friends. So one thing that I did was I would open the Zoom early and like turn off my camera and mute myself, still watching them, and allow them time to like talk to each other and talk about whatever and talk about their weekends before the actual morning meeting circle started. And then we did the same thing with like lunch times where they would like go off and do their work and then come back, and my co-teacher and I were sitting in there and we would play games together. And then one other big thing that we did was my school actually had a rule that we had to turn our Zoom chats off, but we switched the feature. Yeah, because, you know, there were, you know, yeah. But we actually made it so that they could message us as the host. So we would use the Zoom chats as check-in, so we could talk privately with students like, how are you? Are you okay? You sound different, whatever. All of our different check-ins and all of the relationships that we have built, we kind of moved it over to virtual learning. I know this new group is going to be different and have different needs from us and whatever, but the community that we've built, that's the way that we kind of tried to shift it over.
Yeah, we're in this work right now. We're actually doing our Teacher Institute. So we're facilitating a lot of sessions on transitioning to virtual learning. Antonia, I really want to push you this year to open the chat back up. We had this whole debate as a community, and we decided that it was oppressive to not let the kids chat and instead teach them how to do it correctly, but don't remove it. But I understand we have probably the exact same problems that you did, but we thought, like, is there a learning experience in
My
this?
class didn't even have a problem, but
I know, let's fight for it this year. But some things we did was we kept our opening circle. I'm going to put a link in the chat. There's a resource we use called Responsive Classroom, and they have a book on opening circle activities. We also created a Google Classroom that was just for mindfulness, and we would link all the best mindfulness resources that we could find. And then we also, our social worker put a lot of like anti-racism work on there for parents and for families. Some things we did consistently was opening and closing circle. We did town halls for the families. We did some across the school and some for teachers. We also let the kids have Zoom parties. There's 1,000 different virtual field trips. So teachers would post a virtual field trip every week, and then the kids would be able to go on it. We would do accountability buddies for readers. We really asked ourselves this question of like, we are responsible for children's educational outcomes, but it's a pandemic. So how do we create a space where they want to go there every single day so that we can still educate them to the best of our ability? And we had really, really high engagement through like this really intentional practice. But the biggest thing is kind of what you said earlier, Tyreek, the instruction needs to be engaging. You need to be interesting. Kids aren't gonna log on to something that's boring. So one of the best things you need to transition is just really engaging, interesting, culturally relevant instruction. So they're gonna want to do that every day. They are craving this interaction and this attention. So getting them on isn't a challenge, it's really keeping them and making it a worthwhile experience for them. The other thing we did was Responsive Classroom will also have a book called Teaching Self-Discipline that we use. And it's all about students independently. It really aligns with Zaretta Hammond's work of students choosing to make decisions, not being told to make them. So we really transitioned that to remote learning by just continuing to co-create with them. How do you think we should participate on Zoom? What do you think we should do when someone's talking? Oh, put ourselves on mute? Good idea. They come up with all the same ideas that you want them to. And we do this from K to 12. Of course, in kindergarten, it sounds adorable. And in 12th grade, it becomes more of a discussion about like democracy and equity of voice. So it's really, really powerful and also helps create that safe space. We also did a lot of like little identity projects with them so that they could feel comfortable with us having them in their home. What are their culture? What are the things you guys like to do, to eat? What are some of your beliefs? Do you have like a little reading nook in your home? So kind of just like this balance of consistently looking at our data, giving a lot of surveys, but using that data to better ourselves, not to stress out parents. What is it that you're still needing? Are there too many platforms? Is it just emotionally overwhelming? We had families with lots of siblings are the biggest thing to watch out for because they are managing 2 or 3 different remote learning curriculums. So we would have our social work team reach out to them and make them individual schedules for each of their children. It's like really kind of just constantly evaluating how many people are logging on. Okay, how do I get that percentage up? What do we need to do differently? Not like, let me send this email to this parent stressing them out. No, like how do I offer more support?
I just want to say, sorry.
No, I just know that there's a few attendees worrying about time. And so for those of you who started chatting me and asking about it, this is being recorded. We will have it posted up within the week. So if you have to leave a little bit early or whatever is going on, please note that you will be able to catch all of this and definitely the end. And I will let you guys continue the conversation because I don't want to interrupt this because I think this is what people really came here to hear and to get those valuable resources and tips. So
yeah, I am, one of the things that we're doing, Educators for Justice, we're doing town halls. Leslie's going to be facilitating, and well, he's going to be one of the panelists and helping facilitate the town hall that we're doing for parents, talking about COVID response and the remote learning, going back and school reopenings. Parents have not really on a macro level had an opportunity to express themselves. And it's kind of, in a sense, I watch my own brother with his sons and have to figure out this and that. And it really is this. My nephew gets schoolwork. He doesn't do it. The teacher calls my brother. My brother yells at my nephew, go do your schoolwork. Like, it's just like this cycle every day. And that's a lot of households. That's a lot of households especially for parents who are working and they have their own jobs, or parents who are dealing with depression because they don't even know how they're going to pay their bills because their job wasn't open for a certain amount of months, the rent's due. And so all of these stresses, it felt really hard calling parents and saying, hey, your son didn't do your work. But before I would have that conversation, I'll ask them how they're doing. They're like, I just got laid off today. I don't know and now I'm like, I don't even, like, what do I talk about? He didn't turn in his deliverable? And you're trying to figure out how you're going to feed your 4 kids. And then you got people who have, some parents, their parents have passed away. Oh, my mother, they're on life support at the hospital right now. I haven't been with my son. He's at my aunt's house in Pennsylvania right now for the last 2 weeks because we can't, I had COVID. And it's just like, wow, there's so much happening. So we're having these town halls. We're having these Sunday discussions, but I'm also willing to, with our platform, elevate the voices of those with like Justin and Leslie and Antonia and Kimberly, and saying they have some answers. And I think, and as educators, all of us in some way, shape, or form have taken from other people and applied it. This is a time where people are rising up, and Justin said it earlier. Because of everything happening, people are rising up. And voices are being amplified, and people are tuning in to what's being said and to who has answers. And Kim just said a bunch of things that is just fabulous. Like the whole idea of a mindfulness class for a Google Classroom, where social workers help parents deliver plans and anti-racism for families. We didn't have that at my school, but those are ideas that we can work towards, right? We had things like that, but I think those are even more intense. And as a grade team leader, those are things that I'm going to work with for my grade as we go to this school year remote. And so I just appreciate all of y'all and giving this insight, because it's definitely valuable and it's influencing my decision making as an educator already.
I think too, with the whole parenting educator conversation, we never consider the parents who are actually educators in that conversation most often. And so they're also managing curriculum that they have to deliver and curriculum that they want their child to execute, right? So all of those, like we never consider that parent in the conversation. I don't hear people talk about that parent at all. On any panel that I've done, myself included, this will be the first time I even mention it. I don't hear, I don't know why we hold our educators to a different kind of "you're not human" standard, right? We want you to make superstars, but you don't get to be human. So I would like to also I want to make room for our educators who are also parents.
And I just want to quickly state, like, the way that we kind of we modeled a circle here today. I mean, this is we had questions. We all went around. We did our rounds, and so I just guess I'll close out by saying we got to keep the circles going. Kim, I honestly think, like, if we could take a video of what you said there and give that out to every principal across this country, like, we could be changing a lot of things. So I really, really appreciate what you just shared.
So with that, thank you so much to everyone who attended this panel. Thank you so much to our panelists. We went over time, but I think that speaks so much to the richness of this conversation and how much more that we need to be engaging around conversations about our students and our families. And like Leslie said, about our educators who are parents and who have families, and what does that mean and what's the next step forward? I encourage everyone to find these good folk on social media, follow what they're up to, because they have a lot of amazing things going on. I'm going to encourage our panelists to throw their social media handles in the chat if you want to do that. Also to follow Black Independence Day. We want to continue having these conversations and continue the opportunity to create more events like this that are virtual, that are accessible, right? Because I think a lot of this work has to continue to be accessible. And even though COVID and everything has been harder, we've seen that, we can have people from across the country coming together to talk about these things. And for those of you not on social media or not following Black Independent Project yet on social media, it's Black as in BLK, Independence, IND, Project. And I will throw that in the chat as well. I hope everyone has an amazing day. And Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you guys for taking the time.
Thank you, Lorianne, for moderating.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you for
That's
creating
a
the space.
powerful-
Tyreek, thank you for inviting me.
For sure. I love y'all. Appreciate y'all.
All right. I'll send you guys the flyer.
All right. See
For
y'all.
those of you going to any other panelists today, our next set is at 2:35 p.m.
Okay.
To check the website there. Thank you.